Right. All month we have been focusing on the most significant mosques in the country historically. And it's not about the biggest or the first or the best looking for different reasons. Each one is impacted in different ways. And we thought we'd cover that. So the very last one that we're going to talk about is Masjid-Islam in Brixton, better known as the Brixton Mosque. And certainly a mosque I frequented very, very often when I lived in that area or that community. So with me is Na'eem Jeenah, of course, better known as director of the Afro-Middle East Centre. We chatted with him a few days ago, remember, but also he's an intrinsic part of the Brixton Mosque or Masjid-Islam. So Naeem, good chatting to you once again. Salaam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. We're doing it too often.
Well, I'll stop today because today is my last day, so I got the message right here. Okay, let's talk about so we've selected this mosque, your mosque, Masjid-Islam, as one of the most significant in the country. But I'm going to leave it to you to say why do you think why? I mean, you have a sense of why do you think it's significant because it has.
Well, two reasons why I would think so. One, Ashraf, is the history of the building. The building was purchased around 96 thereabouts and converted into a mosque. But before that, it was, in a sense, that building still is a kind of landmark in the area. It was a landmark. It was an NGK church, Nederduitse Gereformeerde Kerk. And so really the Church of Apartheid in the area, which was then bought over and converted into a masjid, which included luminaries who spoke there and were involved there, who were very much anti-apartheid for some of them for decades. So I think that's an important, significant thing. And as you know, Ashraf, the building is a heritage site. It can't be, the outside of the building cannot be changed. So it will forever look like a typical NGK church. Apparently, this is what I've been told, that when the NGK churches started being built around the country, there was the same architect or group of architects. So they all essentially look the same. Bigger, smaller, whatever, but essentially they look the same. So Masjidul-Islam looks like an NGK church. So that's I think.
So that's interesting. From the church of the NGK Kerk to now the prayer of the Mosque of Islam. I mean, there's a significant shift in that alone, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the symbolism of it, I think, the symbolism would be less if it was another church from, a Catholic church or Anglican. Anglicans were well known to be against apartheid. But NGK Kerk, that makes it much more symbolic.
Okay. And then the other thing for me, and of course here I have a direct bias in terms of that I was a regular musalli at that mosque, that what stood out was not how pretty the mosque was. It wasn't very pretty compared to some of the other lavish mosques, but it certainly landed in terms of delivering a message, a core message around social justice all through the years I've attended that particular mosque. Would that be the same even today?
Yes, I mean it's reopened now. It was closed for a year and a half through the COVID lockdown, but that certainly is the way that we want it to go. And tomorrow's Eidgah, I think, will be a similar kind of thing. So it's the message that came out of the masjid. I think two aspects of that stand out for many people, and that also sometimes got the masjid into trouble. The one was the kind of the social justice aspect, not shying away from talking about politics, whether local politics, global politics included, and this was a matter of debate with people outside the masjid, inside the masjid, etc. Also included sometimes politicians, until there was a decision made that no politicians would be allowed to speak for a certain time before elections, for example. And the other aspect of the messaging, one other aspect of the messaging was this kind of attempt to embrace immigrants into our community, Muslim immigrants. And if you go to Masjidul-Islam now, Taraweeh, the past few days, past month, or Jummah, you'll see that the majority of the congregation is African, and a good part of that is African from outside of South Africa. And everyone seems to be quite comfortable and taking ownership of the masjid. A third aspect, and this is perhaps the one that got it into the greatest amount of trouble, of its messaging is it's very kind of women friendly. And so from the very beginning, we had women that would speak on Friday doing the pre-khutbah lecture at the masjid, speaking on Eid day at the Eidgah. After a few years after it started, the women's section was changed so that instead of women being upstairs, the downstairs section was partitioned with a kind of pretty see-through partition. And women on one side and men on the other. When we had other events such as weddings, for example, nikahs, then men and women were in the same space. So that was a big part of the and of course women were always on the committee of the masjid, and I know of 3 women that were coordinators of the Jumu'ah. And the Juma lectures.
And I think that's significant. I mean, we were talking the other day about women going to mosque, and I was saying that when my kids were much younger, and I'm talking the boys and the girls, they had this tradition of going to mosque, and certainly on Eid's day there was never a debate. Only because when my kids were very young, and I'm talking to the females, they would know that Eid's day we go to the Eidgah as per the Brixton Mosque. So they've grown up in that culture, right? I mean, so how has that impacted on broader society? Why I say so now, and slowly so, there are more and more mosques in Johannesburg that now cater for women, not on the same equal level as you've just explained, but a lot better than what was happening before, where it was a complete no-go. So that paradigm shift has occurred, and I would think that the Brixton Mosque or the Masjidul-Islam has played a significant role in that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, it wasn't the first masjid. Even in Johannesburg, masjids, particularly in the so-called Malay communities, generally had facilities for women. But it was the first masjid that gave women the kind of attention in the masjid as it did. By the way, I should just say one of the really funny things about Brixton Masjid, I think it's the only masjid I've seen in the world where the men's entrance is really crappy and the women's entrance is welcoming and pleasant. I mean, the men's entrance, as you wonder whether you're going into a dungeon, but the women's entrance look like you're entering into a masjid. So it was that attempt that women should and of course children. You know that for a long time, Ashraf, our Tarawih, you're talking about your kids. That's why I remember this. We had the tradition that during the Tarawih, the basement of the masjid was made into a play center, so that both parents could pray the Taraweeh while someone was looking after the kids downstairs. And we often had, as would be a sense of great fun for many of us, while we were praying, kids running up and down the safs with their toys and whatever, until someone shooed them away. But they felt that they owned the masjid as much as anyone else.
And for those who are critical of that, that's consistent with what happens even in Medina and Makkah today, and certainly all over Turkey, country that many of us sort of admire. So I mean, there you are. That certainly does happen, right, in big numbers. Perhaps take me back to why was the mosque started, and who were the people behind driving the vision that you just explained?
So the mosque was started, to be honest, because there was a feeling among certain people that there needed to be a more kind of progressive masjid, one that had khutbahs. So we're talking about the mid-90s, one that had khutbahs which addressed the issues of the day, rather than khutbahs that repeatedly week after week spoke about things like the miswak and those kinds of beard, etc. And a masjid that had good space for women. So these were two of the big issues: the message that came out through the khutbahs and what the masjid did, and the women issue. So that was the reason that a few people got together. And Iqbal Jazbai was one of the founders of the masjid, together with a number of people who previously had been part of the Muslim youth movement. Akhtar Token, Shaukat Token, a number of others, some of whom are still going to that masjid. Many others of us have moved away from the area, as with you, but still go back at least on Fridays. So it was started with those objectives. And at the time, of course, as I said, there were a couple of masajid in Johannesburg that had any facilities for women. But the dominant view among the ulama was that there was no need for masajid to have space for women. Women should pray at home. And as you said earlier on, that trend has been changing, and that trend has been changing because people like those who started Masjidul-Islam were uncompromising in their position that women must have space in the masjid, and in a sense pulled the others along with them, whether they liked it or not, and despite the kind of attacks that they got at that time.
Absolutely.
Soon after that, there was the tip Eid Salah that started in Durban, and the women who were involved there were accused of being prostitutes and lesbians and all kinds of things because they had an Eid Salah that men and women were present at.
Yeah, so much has changed. I mean, I know you've got Tembisa Fakude talking tomorrow, and I remember when he spoke 3 years ago before COVID, because he messaged me to say I'm talking, and he was, and this is the nature of that mosque where he dressed up like he normally dresses with a jacket and a bow tie, and I presume that he would he would do the same thing again tomorrow. But I mean,
Sure.
bottom line, basically, the focus has always been on the essence of the message as opposed to the form, isn't it?
Yes. No, look, the form is important as well. I mean, in Islam, in many cases, the form is important. And so, you could come to the Eid Salah tomorrow, and the form, people might be dressed in bow ties, some people at least, but the form is similar to what you would see in other masajid. We have the takbir, we have the salah, we have the khutbah thereafter. There are some changes in the form. The khutbah often is in English and Arabic, not just in Arabic, because of course the khutbah is supposed to be an admonition to people in the language they understand. And the other kind of change in the form is that you could have a woman speaker speaking at the masjid. But the message is certainly the thing that's most different from most other places.
Okay, we leave it. We leave it with the challenge. In terms of the impact that Masjid-Islam has made, it's certainly been impactful. And the question is, where to from here? What happens next? Don't answer that now. That's just for you and I to reflect on, as we reflect on the history of Masjid-Islam in Brixton. Na'eem Jeenah, thank you for your time. Great chatting to you. Eid Mubarak for tomorrow to yourself, your family, and the Masjid-Islam community as well.
So Eid Mubarak, and there's some of us that might be celebrating Eid today as well. Assalamu
Wow.
alaikum.
Points made, right? And talking about that today, tomorrow, I don't know. Well, Walid Bata will play out then with the day of Eid.